Assistant Commissioner Michael Willing joining us. Mick, good evening to you. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, Alan.
The Police Minister says they can be jailed for 6 months. What are you going to do tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow we'll be enforcing the health order, Alan. Obviously, the Police Minister's comments are accurate. That is one possible option. We will be issuing infringements where necessary, but hopefully we won't get to that. You know, if people apply some common sense and not turn up and abide by the court's decision, you know, we can move through this together.
But basically, if they don't abide by the court decision, they are involved in an illegal activity. Now, if you or I drove illegally on the right-hand side of the road, we'd be pulled up and put in the wagon. What are you going to do with all these numbers if they materialise? Well,
Alan, I can tell you, we're not averse to dealing with protests, as you know. You know, we deal with protests every single day of the year, and we have sufficient resources to deal with anything. So if they turn up en masse, we'll deal with them en masse. And I think the Police Commissioner made a comment in relation to issuing infringements. We'll be doing that from the go-get if people turn up against the wishes of the court.
What is your intelligence telling you? You're obviously getting advice as to what is going to happen. Have you got any idea of numbers?
We don't. I mean, the application was for up to 500, but the issue with these protests in a time of a pandemic is we just simply don't know the numbers that will turn up. We do have intelligence to suggest that they want to go to the Domain, which is, again, a problem for us, but we've dealt with protests there before, and I'll have police officers on the ground early, and we'll be dealing with whoever turns up. Again, if some common sense is applied and people don't come and stay away, that's a good thing for everyone.
But Mick, common sense is not common. I mean, Michael and I talked about this in relation to Anzac Day. Now, you people all said, OK, we can't have the Anzac Day march because there's a likelihood of transmission of the virus and so on. And these people were so creative. They walked down to the front of their homes, they waved their flags, they played their bugle out the front. It was healthy. They respected and honoured the occasion. Why couldn't these people be creative enough to do something about their protest rather than putting other people at risk?
Well, it's a good question, Alan. I think the judge on Sunday described the situation at the moment as being on a knife's edge, and that's really what it's like. And there are many ways to get your views across and express your opinions. But just, you know, we're at a time where protests at the time of a pandemic is dangerous for everyone, and we're asking people not to attend.
So just want to clarify one thing to our viewers. The courts have not approved the march.
That's correct.
So the march is then illegal. They are breaking the law.
It's unauthorised.
Will everyone who breaks the law tomorrow be dealt with?
We will be dealing with them as best we possibly can, Alan. At the end of the day, we have sufficient resources on the ground to deal with whatever numbers that turn up. You know, now, whether or not, I can issue 500 infringements is something that we're yet to see, but you wouldn't want to be the first person to receive one.
Good on you. Good on you, Mick. Good to talk to you.
That's
the Assistant Commissioner, Mick Willing. Back to Michael. What do you make of all of this? It's a tough job for the police, isn't it?
Well, they're in a terrible position because, of course, they're putting their own life on the risk here with this virus as well, having to deal with these silly people. But the problem I have with this, Alan, is the whole protest is based off a lie.
Quite.
This is about Indigenous deaths in custody, and the extension of that logic is that they're overrepresented deaths in custody, that there's a massive issue that needs to be dealt with, and even during a public health emergency, the situation is so grave that they've all got to get out there and make a point, risking their life and everyone else. Well, you look at the numbers. I mean, the Australian Institute of Criminology last year made very clear that Indigenous deaths aren't more likely than non-Indigenous. They're not even as likely. They're less likely in custody, in prison custody, compared to non-Indigenous persons. Yes. So even the premise of this is misleading.
And there's violence in Central Australia known Indigenous Australians towards Indigenous Australians, particularly in relation to women and children, hundreds and hundreds of them. This does nothing to alleviate that problem. If it mirrors what happened in America as a result of the appalling death of that black person, nonetheless, as you said, the statistics are that 89.5% of all Afro-American homicides in America are created by Afro-Americans. So the premise of the whole thing is dishonest.
And there's a similar reality about, as you've said, remote Indigenous communities and the problems with homicide and sexual abuse and violence here. And Jacinta Price has made that point, and for her trouble, she's been hounded out of town.
Of course. Are we going to have people, what do you think? Are people going to be chanting and stomping and marching in the streets? They are a minority and they represent a minority. Yeah. Why does government... I've said this, we never hear the Prime Minister or these people stand and say, look, in the country that I lead, this will not happen. That's called leadership. Why don't they do this?
I have no idea. Because the majority would back them.
That's it.
To me, it's crazy.
To the hilt.
But you speak of a
I
minority.
thought Mick Fuller did brilliantly the other day, and he said, look, I don't care what the court say. They come, they're illegal, they'll be dealt with. And Mick Willing said the same thing there.
Very good. But, I mean, talking about minorities, I mean, we've had a cheese brand name changed.
Yes. Oh, that's another...
There's a minority of one.
I know.
One complaint to Saputo.
I'll have a word about all that later. Keep at it.
We will.
We
Thanks,
love having
Alan.
you. Isn't he good? Michael McLaren.